Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 184 of Humanity Rising. Humanity Rising is an initiative of Ubiquity University and over 300 partnering organizations from all over the world that came together last spring and have been offering daily sessions on Zoom to enable people from all over the world to come together to share their experiences of what it's like going through this pandemic and to confer around solutions and visions that they have for the future. It's been quite a journey. We've covered an amazing array of issues, and we try to keep up with world events as they emerge. This last weekend was tough for many of us. So we witnessed on Saturday the conclusion of the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump and his acquittal when in the face of overwhelming evidence around the incitement to insurrection conducted out of the Oval Office of the White House, a core group of Republicans voted to acquit. And that has exacerbated in the United States, and I think will reverberate globally, an increasing divide and polarization in the global polity and in the national polity of the United States. And then the very next day, we celebrated Valentine's, and we were heartful with those we love. We expressed our gratitude and thanksgiving for those with whom we have loving relationships. And it was out of that Monday emerged. So I wanted to just note the contradictions in our world, the challenges to relationships, which is our theme today. Before we jump into our program, though, let's take a moment and just settle into your body and take a few deep breaths. Close your eyes and put your attention on your heart. See if you can listen to your heartbeat. And in a spirit of deep gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive at this precious moment in the human journey, that you can feel the heartbeat of others. Thank you, everyone. Now with an open heart and with a heart full of gratitude for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to open our program by just simply observing that we chose this day for a program on the alchemy of right relationship and how we can close the great divide that separates so many of us in our world today, to be right after Valentine's. We thought that this would be the perfect time to contemplate what is arguably the central challenge that has emerged out of the pandemic. If you think back a year ago, it was a strange thing. We'd had many pandemics before, we've had many flus, but in the face of the coronavirus, the world in almost one accord shut itself down. We went into lockdown. We went into isolation. We started to keep physical distancing from one another. We weren't kissing on the cheeks. We weren't shaking hands. We weren't expressing ourselves in our normal relational ways. And there have been many studies, as you know, about how the pandemic has broken in small ways among acquaintances and friends that you meet normally at work over the coffee machine or around the coffee machine, and even in the intimacy of our own homes. We've been used to going in and out of our homes, and all of a sudden we're shut in the house with everybody. And there's been a lot of consternation, a lot of upset in that very basic relational matrix that helps define who we are in relation to other people. I thought often, Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher of the 20th century, in his masterwork, I and Thou, where he talks about I-it relationships, our usual normal relationships, and our I-thou relationships, our intimate relationships, and how the pandemic has challenged relationships across the board. So today we want to contemplate right relationships. And I'm very privileged and honored to be able to introduce to you Anne-Marie Desai, who I've gotten to know through Humanity Rising. And we were living near each other. I was in Amsterdam and she lives in Brussels, but we weren't able to see each other because of the pandemic. Another challenge to relationships, not being able to go over to other people's homes and engage in the conviviality of simple friendship and getting acquainted. So we've had to do everything on Zoom, which has helped to reshape how we relate to one another. Another challenge, but another opportunity for intimacy and relationship and compassion and expressions of goodwill and communication. Anne-Marie is a systemic coach. She consults with individuals and organizations on both leadership and the relationship between leadership and relationship. She's a faculty at the Co-Action Training Institute. She's a senior consultant with the European Union Administration Institute. And she has practiced with the HeartMath Institute and engages in HeartMath, Heart Coherence meditations on a regular basis in her personal and professional activities. So Anne-Marie, it's a pleasure welcoming you and your colleague to the program today. And I turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's such a joy. Joy is the word. Such a joy to be here in Humanity Rising it feels like home to me. It has been a second home to me. And I want to extend my deep gratitude to you, Jim, for convening this ongoing conversation with amazing people across the globe, and to have provided this second home where we get to be together, process this pandemic together, and ask ourselves, where do we want to go? Who do we want to be in this next stage? So thank you so much for your introduction and for welcoming us here. And it's also my joy to welcome my dear friend Sunshitsa Getter. Sunshitsa and I have known each other for about 12 years, and we've been working together for also pretty much that long. And there's something really unique about Sunshitsa. We're all unique, but she's unique in her ability to hold systems in their complexity, and to really create spaces of courage where people can go through the heat of whatever is creating tension in relationships, and help them process that tension with respect, whilst she allows people to see one another and to come to some alignment. And whenever I myself forget about bringing heart into relationships, she's the angel on my shoulder who reminds me to connect back to the heart, because the heart is the way, is the doorway to creating conscious relationships and generative relationships. So it's my great pleasure in welcoming her and being in conversation with us here today. So welcome, Sunshitsa.
Thank you for your beautiful words, Anne-Marie. It's an absolute honor to be here, and such a joy as always to co-create with you.
Thank you. So as Jim said, this is a good time to reflect about how do we become more conscious about how we show up in relationships, and how can we bring heart and love into relationships with people that are across the divide, and especially the people who we have difficulty with in this moment, because they may hold very different views of the world than the ones we hold. And it feels very important to actually ask ourselves, how can we do this more consciously, more intentionally? And our hope today is to share with you some insights we have by doing this work with communities, with organizations, helping them close the divide, and also share tools and practices, and also invite you to reflect about your own reality. So it's we also want to reflect on how can we individually, but also as a community, perhaps, can engage into conscious and intentional relationships in a more intentional way. I like to think that we are a community of people with a lot of heart, and a community of people who deeply cares about the earth, about creating a world that is safe, but also that is respectful of life in all its forms. And I think we can together make a difference in our families, in our communities, and in the bigger society. So our hope is to also engage with you today. We would very much like to hear from you. We're going to ask questions to you in the chat and invite you to respond. so that we are co-learners as well here. And we use your reflections, your questions to direct our conversation. So the idea behind this conversation here is to look for where do we have agency to create more regenerative relationships, more conscious relationships, and right relationships. And in a minute, we're going to clarify what we mean by right relationship, because the word right may feel or sound funny. So yeah, the idea is we're living just now in a pivotal time in our human history, and I feel that we need all of our hearts together to do this work, to sit in the fire of meeting others who hold different views from ours, and to have all hearts on deck. So Sanchisa is going to take us first through what we mean by right relationship, and then off we go into the conversation.
And thinking about right relationship at this time is perhaps even a bit more challenging, but equally really necessary. Anne-Marie and I have been meditating a lot on this idea of relationship, especially at this time, because as Jim was saying, we have been stripped of the possibility of actually getting connected with our fellow humans. We haven't seen our families for a while. So COVID has been a big revealer of how much relationships mean to us, but also where they are weak or strong, where they're tense, or where we need to work on them. So that has at least been our experience in a way. So it seems, as Anne-Marie said, that this pivotal moment, we almost have no choice but to look at relationships and which ones we want to invest in, and how to get reconnected. So when we say right relationship, we don't use it in a way of thinking there's the opposite of right as wrong, right? But the right relationship as a kind of a relationship that has awareness of itself. So there's consciousness to it, of thinking and being aware of what's happening in a relationship. It's a relationship where we make a choice of how to engage. And it's a relationship that requires some action from our side, which goes back to what Anne-Marie was saying about agency. So sometimes that action will look like working on ourselves, and sometimes it will look like engaging in a conversation with the other, or maybe having a bigger, more active or more social action. But in any case, when we speak of right relationships, we're talking more about this space, which is not the space of right or wrong, but the space of inclusivity, where we actually create from diversity, where there is a possibility of alchemy, of something new to emerge, where it doesn't become, where our agency is not about our choice, which side we want to be on, but actually through connection to build something else. Now, easier said than done, right? Relationships require mastery from us, but place where we can always start, or where we always have agency, is the relationship itself. Because we ourselves contain multitudes, right? There's a whole system within us. We have our many selves that are inside of us. And in some ways, practicing that right relationship internally is the step that's always available to us, but also something that will impact on the outside. As we lead you through our view of things today, we want to sort of contrast these two things, and based on the belief that what's happening happening internally always have an impact on the outside, right? The way I'm in relationship with myself will always be reflected in my relationship with the others. But also the way that our society is structured, the way the relationships are calcified around us in our world, will have an impact on my experience in this world. So we really want to hold the attention that our agency is there to start from us, but we are not always responsible for the experience that we have. And sometimes, changing the structures will change our experience, changing ourselves will impact the structure. So it's that loop that we want to speak to.
Great, thank you. And so we want to start, as Sunshisa was saying, by exploring how we are in relationship with self and how we can integrate the many parts of self, and especially the parts of self that are marginalized. We all have dominant parts of self and we have marginalized part of selves, and agency starts with awareness. So being aware of what's going on inside is key, because our relationships are going to reflect back to us which parts are dominant, which parts are marginalized, and sometimes what we experience outside of us and what we reject in others are the parts that we haven't integrated. Hence the importance to look at what's the dynamic inside.
Yes. So we thought we were going to do this through a conversation. And the conversation will be between Anne-Marie and myself. But there's an invitation that whichever question we pose to each other is actually a question for you as well. And we would really welcome your thoughts and comments in the chat, just so that we can witness each other. Because one, I think, really important thing in shifting the way we are in relationship is witnessing each other in our humanity. Because that space of witnessing without trying to forcefully change the other person is conducive to that alchemy of what we call here right relationship. So Anne-Marie, you and I had a bit of a chat before, and we know each other really well, and we are sort of also a little bit addicted to these kinds of conversations because we believe in talking about in conscious relationships so much. But I will ask you again, and whatever comes up for you, please bring it today, because on any given day, a different part of us shows up to run the show, right? So yeah. I'm going to ask you, for you, what is a part of your inner world? And we know, you contain, as I said, multitudes and diversity within you. Which parts of you get to have the space when you show up in the world? Which are the ones that are dominant voices, the voices that perhaps are heard a lot in your interactions with others? Mm-hmm. Maybe one or a few, I don't know what will, yeah.
Yeah. The one that I'm often aware of is the teacher slash educator or educated part of me. And it shows up a lot, and sometimes even more than I want. I sort of have sometimes to tone it down a little. And it in my case, it's dominant because I come from a family who has immigrated from Portugal to France. And I was bullied at school because I was a foreigner. And for me, one of my survival strategies was to learn and have knowledge so that I would somehow have a bit of authority, so to speak. And therefore, I invested a lot in knowledge. I invested to the point that today I am actually an educator as well. So that's one of my dominants.
Yes, and I get to know that part a lot, and I really value it as well. I mean, it brings so much value in your work and to people around you. Now, what we also want to talk about is this tendency, and perhaps this is really important to underline. There's this tendency that we think feeds the unhealthy relationship with self, if we talk about right relationship, which is that we tend to have this hierarchy, so that we align different parts of us in this linear method where we have the top one, and then do you want below, and then do you want below, and so, going, rather than having them all at the same time as resources to engage with. So teacher ranks really high in your world, in your inner world, right? So the rank and privilege of the teacher stands really high. What is perhaps the part that then is really pushed low in that linear relationship that we don't think is, the one that we want to feed? But what is perhaps the one that's pushed really low and that doesn't get to be seen often?
Yeah. So not surprisingly, the one that's been marginalized is the one that doesn't know, the one that doesn't have knowledge, the one, and there was shame for me as I grew up around not knowing, not having knowledge, of coming from a family where my grandparents were illiterate. So I really marginalized that part to the point that not knowing, when I'm in a group and not knowing, can be problematic for me. Can put me in a vulnerable space. Yes. Asking questions for a long time was vulnerable for me because there was always this need to know, to be able to come up with an answer.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And
the non-educated, I would say, non-educated.
Non-educated one. Thank you for sharing that. And the invitation is also for everybody else to please share those parts of you that don't get to interact with the others, that are ranked really low in your inner hierarchy of parts of you. And that might be even connected to that feeling of shame. Because that is the beginning of othering. And we really want to underline this here. That's the beginning of othering. The moment we cannot embrace that not educated one within us, we will not be able to embrace it in the others. I don't know if that's your experience, but we very often feed the judgment towards some groups outside.
Yeah, well, this is actually what is happening with me at the moment with the events happening in the world and with alternative realities that people are voicing without any evidence for what they are voicing, or people having very black and white views of the world and not showing curiosity or for the complexity of what's going on, or for not knowing much about what's going on. I don't know much either, but there's where I tend to go is into judgment, into othering people that are not curious, that are not that are pretending they know, when in actual fact maybe they don't know much.
And I can use that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a bit of othering going on there. Yes.
Yes. And thank you for sharing that, because that's the space, when we were, there's so many things that are valuable here. When, on one hand, I mean, this inner work comes, and we want to really sort of explicitly point to that, comes in many shapes and forms. Some of you will be familiar with it through Jungian psychology or voice dialogue or any other parts of looking at our many aspects of self. what we want to underline here is that idea of rank and privilege. And we're going to talk more about that concept, but sort of that idea of creating a higher hierarchy of different parts of self that really does not build, right, healthy, wholesome relationships, but feeds the othering. So this idea of ranking and a lack of awareness of the privilege that we have, because there's something about, we very often equate that privilege of being educated, in this case, with the rank that we hold. And we immediately utter those who are not educated without thinking of the gift and privilege that we had with it. The only way, or the first step in embracing that conversation, because we have to start it with the self, is to be curious and compassionate with that part of self that we are uttering. So again, you and I had this conversation, and we can always go deeper in it. But it's really, if you're willing to, looking at the value or contribution of that part that does not know to your system. What might be the contribution of that part? If you can get in touch with it, or maybe you can just be aware that you can't. I mean, we really are not forcing anything here.
Yeah. So what is interesting is I do have to pause, actually, and to really be curious and compassionate to connect with that part of myself. I really feel it's really in the corner, in the dark corner, and the value this part can bring for me and for me in my relationships is a sense of innocence, because innocence and also openness. Okay, well, it's okay not to know. It's okay not to have the answers. A sense of wonder as well, with this innocence, this openness, as opposed to, and it will soften the dominant part that wants to have the answers and is sometimes attached to her answers. So there's a bit of softening that can happen with the compassion to this part that doesn't know, and making it okay not to know.
And it's, yes, because before it was like there's the part that knows, and then the part that doesn't know, that's ignorant, and they come into an impasse and nothing can happen. No constructive move or action can happen. Whereas if you sort of hold it a little bit differently with that idea, there's the one who knows and there's the one who wonders.
Yeah.
Possibly something can happen. Again, we don't know, but that's where we are open to that alchemy, just as a possibility.
And I just want to jump in here, Sanchit, to build on something you said earlier, which was that what we don't integrate inside of us, or what we don't, you didn't say it in these words, but what we don't accept in ourselves, what we don't integrate, gets reflected outside, and that this impacts our relationship with others, but also the societal structures impact how we are in relationship. And I'm very aware that growing up in France, where the educational system was all about knowledge, piling knowledge into our heads and building us, shaping us into being very, very rational, analytical, where there was no space for creativity, didn't allow me, or didn't encourage the part of me that doesn't know. Yeah. So it's I just want to underline that.
Absolutely, that it exactly is that loop. Because sometimes we tend to make ourselves responsible for everything, or we tend to make the structures and the society responsible for everything, or just say that's just the way things are, right? What we're looking for here in the field of right relationship is looking for the space where something new can occur or emerge. And that is exactly that. We have to start with the awareness. What created my relationship with the self, and how am I perpetuating or creating it? Because you're absolutely right. Different societies and different worlds or groups that we belong have their different qualities, have different currency. So in your growing up, the high currency was the currency of expertise, right? And that will have an impact. But again, going back to what we really want to underline, that if we again stick to that idea of hierarchy of different aspects, you will have just different aspects of you competing. Oh, knowing is better, not knowing is better. This is better, this is better. What we are inviting here is moving away from that hierarchy and rank into, again, a field where they can coexist and something new can be created.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for taking me through the process. And I just want to underline that when Sunshitsa and I do this work in organizations and sometimes with individuals, we use a process that we already partly named here, which is curiosity. For the dominance and the marginalized parts, it's the connecting to what is it afraid of? What does he want to protect, this marginalized part? What does the dominant part also want and tries to protect us from? And build this connection with compassion, and so that we can find ourselves in a place of choice. So this is just a process, and there are many, many more out there. So it's just one that we're happy to use, but you'll find that others are very similar, that like the one of Tara Brach with rain and many others. So
and it might be good to mention the rank and privilege.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, because also the idea or the concept of rank and privilege comes from Arnold Mendel's work and process psychology. And it's really useful to look at our different positioning and holding differences with each other, because we all have various privileges and ranks in relationship with the others, but we can very easily get drunk on rank, as Arnold Mendel says it, if we are not aware of it, if we don't hold it responsibly, if we don't use it for the good of everyone.
Yes, indeed. So there's another part we want to explore with you, which is the relationship with other. And I'm wondering if we can pause a second here just to check, because I've seen the chat very, very active. I've seen Kala asking about this loop between the inner world and relationship with others. So I'm just wondering whether there are some sharing also on the questions you asked me, Sanchitsa, and if we want to bring this in.
So a lot of acknowledgement for curiosity is really important.
And vulnerability. Yeah, curiosity is critical. Yes. Yeah, and different qualities have different currencies and value and currents flow in relationship to others. Yes.
Mentioning of humility as necessary, which I think is really important, and goes back to that idea, holding our own privileges with responsibility and awareness, and not better than, because rank and privilege is very often used to position us as better than the other, whereas we are here seeing just like how do we co-create from our diversity, and co-create with and create that power through diversity rather than power over the other is better than the other.
Yeah. So to go to the relationship.
And Anne-Marie, I'm so sorry, there's a question, and maybe just before you go there, how do you deal with others who have no interest in exercising curiosity in a relationship?
It's I would say it's going back to the curiosity, like being curious about that.
And that was somebody, one of the participants, Patricia, said, listen to them. So there's that, there's that invitation as well, being curious about what's going on, and potentially being curious about our experience. And I think that's where we always start. Because sometimes the only agency we have is really staying and being curious about our experience and how we want to engage with it.
Yes. And speaking to exactly to the impact it has on us, without being attached to the outcome, without trying to convert the person, but simply letting them know, being curious about their experience and what makes them take the position they take, and also being curious about our own experience. What does that do to us? What is the impact on us? What's true for us? What are the feelings and the emotions and the thoughts that I'm processing just now when I'm in touch with the fact that the other person is not interested?
And then curiosity, what has them closed? What has them be so closed? What's so threatening to them that they cannot be open to listening? And perhaps why did they make that choice? Maybe it's threatening, or maybe it's their choice. So I'm not, making that definitive. There's comment also about, are we talking about integrating the shadow side of the personality? So in the Jungian concepts, absolutely. And the invitation is also to look at it as a whole range. Sometimes it's, integrating our shadow, but we have so many ranks and levels that very often it's not a shadow, and yet we utter it very consciously in a way, but we're breaking the connections. So it sort of absolutely builds on that idea and the old concept, but it evokes also thinking about those that we are conscious of, and we just think we made the choice not to be like another, or not to allow one part of ourselves forwards.
Yeah, beautiful. Yes, and Ruta writes, sometimes the only agency we have is to pay attention to our own experience. Absolutely. And this process of being curious, compassionate, and connecting also applies to self. It's where I can start. And sometimes we forget. Sometimes we are so caught up in wanting to change something in the other that which usually doesn't work. We forget to attend to our own experience and to compassionately look into what is the dynamic at play inside of me, and how is this potentially bringing up tension in the relationship. So going inside, as Sanchita said earlier, we always have agency. The only place where we have agency is by paying attention to what's going on inside of us, and that's a important work to do, because it has huge consequences in how we show up in relationships, but ultimately on the type of societies we create. Yeah? Because we are constantly, without knowing, ranking things, as Sanchita was saying, and marginalizing people, marginalizing certain qualities over others. And if we took this to such an extreme today, we took it to such an extreme that in many places the only way that some people find to be heard and to feel that they matter is through violence, or huge disruption. So we need to also be curious about what makes some people use violence in order to feel, to try and feel heard, to feel that they matter.
And what makes other people, use self-righteousness, or even sort of, being on that moral high horse in a way. Because I also want to, include, there are many ways of disconnecting. So violence can be a disconnect or asking to be heard. Equally, that moral high ground of the privileged ones can be the way to disconnect. And I think somebody has mentioned that in the chat. And also, I think, Anne-Marie, you and I have been talking about that, how easy it is also to go into the place of within ourselves or with the other, just tolerating the difference, but not really being curious. Sort of, it just reminds me of that moral high ground, because sometimes we just say, well, we're going to be so, good to sort of let the other person understand that they're wrong in a in a non-aggressive way, but we were equally disconnected at that moment. So I just thought it's worth mentioning that what we are talking about in right relationship is not tolerating, it is integrating, it is co-creating from that diversity.
It requires engaging. It really requires stepping across the divide and being curious and connecting to the experience of the other. And that can be very difficult, especially in the current context, where a lot of people, me included at times, feel very insecure, feel threatened by the state of affairs, the state of the world. And when I do, I tend to revert to my reactive tendencies. And in my reactive tendencies is an expression of black and white thinking, trying to rank things, the good and the bad. And they are the good people and they're the bad people. And sometimes they can feel threatened, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, simply by the opinions of others, people who hold very different opinions from mine, very different worldviews from mine. And I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only one out there. So the question is, can we reach out? How can we reach out? How can we still hold curiosity, compassion, and connect with people who have views that I find really threatening to my own world, or to my own dream for the world, or my own aspirations for the world? And that's what we want to explore a little bit more here. And we want to bring, again, this idea you mentioned, righteousness. For sure, for me, one of the biggest obstacles to be open, bring heart, bring curiosity and love for other people is my righteousness, is my need, or my my need to be right at times. And I can understand that, in this world, because it's so disruptive, sometimes our opinions, our worldview, is the only thing we can hold on to, almost. Yeah. So we so identify with our views at times that it's easy to other people, to make them wrong. And we got to the point where it seems impossible to actually walk this divide, to close the gap. So the invitation is here for us to consider, how can we sit in the fire with people that we other, and to ask ourselves, first of all, who are those people that we other? Who are they? Who do I tend to get triggered by? Who has me so disconnected, even to myself, that I cannot envision a future where we coexist? And because awareness is the first step towards agency. And then, of course, I can do the work on myself, and I can also choose to do the work with others, the very people that I am othering. But it requires that I am able to connect with at least one person in this group of othering, because othering is making everybody a category, a problem, an obstacle, sometimes even irrelevant. But it requires me to identify and be willing to connect with at least one of the people who I'm ordering.
Well,
To bring the human connection.
Jen was mentioning in the chat that her way of connecting to those with opposite opinions is having a conversation that is about a song that they might like, so connecting on that human level. And I think just speaks to what we want to bring here, which is that, we in our conversation call it the act of radical intimacy, of really being willing to meet and witness the other person. And when we can, and again, with huge compassion, that there will be times where we cannot cross to the other side. But I think I just wanted to underline that there's, rich conversation going on, that people are already doing that, meeting humanity on the other side.
Great.
And you started talking a bit, and perhaps we can expand on that, of how that rank and privilege translates into our social structures.
Yes.
And how do we handle that? Because that becomes even more overwhelming and difficult.
Especially in the current context.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Do you want to go on and talk about time spirits? I think maybe it's a good time to.
Sure, yes. So in this idea of, if we talk about that rank and privilege in different parts of us, and we really all engaged into what it's like to look within ourselves and then sort of venturing into a relationship with others. But when we look in our social milieus and our world, we can see that ranking sometimes go into extremes, and we're all witnessing such polarization in our society, but also historically so many isms, because isms are just the extreme version of ranking one group of people as better than the other.
Yeah,
and
those form of othering.
It's another, exactly. So it's an extreme form of othering, and it's a form of othering that then has an impact on everyone, which is why Arnold Mindell, and we referred to him before, calls those forces, social forces, he calls them time spirits, because they then exist in our space beyond individuals. It doesn't, if we talk about the big ghost or time spirit of racism, It is not anymore just thinking about, am I racist, am I not racist? Because we know we're imbued and those time spirits are amongst us. And it's much more difficult to regain that agency. But the first step even there is thinking about the awareness of what is the impact of that time spirit on me, on my group, on the way I see things. Where does it keep me blind or constricted? Where does it prevent me to see the other person or another group? Where does it bring me into self-righteousness? But we thought it's really useful to bring it to the group, to start thinking about those extreme forms of otherings as time spirits that we all have to carry. And then in engaging with them, we realize that actually we need to collectively engage with them.
Yeah.
Regardless where on the spectrum we are.
And perhaps we can give some examples of those time spirits that are currently impacting the emotional field, the culture around us. And one of them, obvious, is racism. It's shaping the way we are, it's shaping the way we are in relationship. It's getting us really stuck, not just in the US, but in other places. But we can talk about also the ism, this time spirit of fascism that is coming up in Europe. We are very sensitive to it because we've experienced it. My parents, they left Portugal because of fascism. Many countries in Europe have lived through it, and it's still here. It's like a ghost. It's like a ghost that is still impacting the way we think, the way we behave, and again, the way we are in relationship as well. So it's important to acknowledge the impact of those forces on us. And to, again, and maybe you can comment on that, Sanchitsa, on the impact of rank and privilege again in relation to those big time spirits.
Well, those big time spirits are always the sort of voice of the time that positions one group of people as really high in rank, or one kind of thinking as really high in rank. Right? And as we said, in racism, it's really extreme. It's the whole, like the color of the skin becomes the way of ranking people. But in all of those isms, they're all steeped into better than and the only right way, and uttering, not just uttering as we don't agree, but uttering to extinction in a way. So again, they're hugely, they're almost like, again, the reason why we bring them here is because they are the extreme version. And that's why we sort of started within ourselves, when that uttering is a bit more subtle and sometimes we're not even aware of it. But if we feed it, if we allow it to grow, it gets into extremes that we're witnessing in our societies.
Yeah, great. So one of the things that is very important to us is really creating spaces where people, again, who hold different views about the world, can get together in a space that is safe and where they allow themselves to share what's going on for them in a very personal way. So for us all to close the divide, we need to get personal. To get personal with ourselves, but also personal with others. And really listening for what is their reality. And what does that do to me? And have hopefully a safe space to share what does that do to me, to hear that other reality. What is the part of me that feels threatened, which are the part of me that feels actually having rank over what this person is sharing, so that we can move away from our positions and getting in touch with something deeper that we care about. And most often than not, when we dig deeper, when we inquire deeper into what are the motives, what are the dreams, what are the aspirations, what are the fears of the other person that I am mothering, we find a lot of commonalities. We find a lot of commonalities. And it's the process of, as Arnold Mindell would say, sitting in the fire with that person, of getting really personal, that allows to create the heart-to-heart connection. We may not agree, and it's okay. It's okay not to agree. It's okay even not to like each other. That's not the point, in a way. The point is, can I connect to my humanity? Can I connect to their humanity? And that requires being in the same space together.
And
no shortcut. Yeah.
No shortcuts, exactly. I think what we are, we speak of that, of getting personal, of that radical intimacy. But in effect, all that means is actually creating space where we can be present in this moment with our own experience. Because one of the reasons why Mindell calls time spirits ghosts, because they're just ghosts, because they take us into the past. They take us away from our body into the previous way of thinking. And at the same time, they impact our reality right now, but they prevent us from being present to each other. So, the invitation is really through that curiosity and compassion and the choice and action to connect with the other, to allow the experience of the other to be validated and our own experience to be validated, where we might find, as you said, Anne-Marie, some commonalities, or we might find delightful differences out to which we can create something new or allow something new to emerge. But if we are stuck in the past, if we are hijacked by those time spirits, nothing new can be created. We're just existing in the old universe.
Exactly. Hence the importance of doing this work, because we want to reinvent or we want to reconnect with our humanity. It's maybe not so much a reinvention, maybe it's a reconnection, a recognition with who we are deep inside, humans with some dark parts and some light parts, and be able to accept that in others and to help each other process what's difficult within us. That's the price to pay to have a more human world. And it requires courage. It requires the willingness to leave behind, again, our worldviews, our need to be right. That's true for me. And to create those spaces, to convene those spaces with people who are from the othering groups, and get together in the room to process that together, so that we can discover, oh, okay, so that's what is going outside as well. That's why I'm acting this way, to realize that what I thought was just personal is something that gets played out also outside. Yeah. And then take responsibility for that.
And there's so much richness in the chat, and I'm also noticing, the pull between engaging with the wonderful comments in the chat and sort of staying on the timeline. But what I wanted to, on one hand, there were so many chats about the children's books and how and I guess the way how they're told and how they might perpetuate the divide, and obviously how, you know, rank and privilege are a way of simplifying our differences. And if we go to all of the fairy tales, they make it very simple, because that's the way at our very young age we can sort of engage with the notion of good and evil. But not to go into that, so there's also a need, I think, from what I see in the chats, for different stories, different myths that are not going to perpetuate this hierarchical idea of rank and privilege, but real joy in diversity, right? And we sort of lack those stories more or less in our, you know, collective mythology. But there's also this comment, I think Jane was saying, what would be the benefit of understanding somebody who's on the other side of climate change? And perhaps, you know, I think it's a very relevant question, like, why bother? You know, why go somewhere where we know and that there is, you know, that somebody completely contrary to our values exists. If okay, and Marie, I'll offer my bit of an answer, and then would love to pass it on to you. And you know, like, what we have experienced both through our work with people and through our own work is that when you witness another person and really hear them, the grip on a certain position is let go slowly, and the position becomes a little bit less important. Now, I am not engaging with the person who does not believe in, you know, the climate change, or that the climate change exists, or, you know, like, I'm not, if I engage with them just in order to change their opinion, I am not doing the work that we are talking about here, which we are not saying, you know, we shouldn't engage them that way, but that's not what we're talking about. But if I find in myself the space to be curious and to really hear their experience and to witness them fully, what often happens, no promises here, and we don't know how long it takes. Sometimes it's very short, sometimes it's longer. The grip on a position or opinion is let go of, and something shifts in the space, right? Something shifts in that mutual space. So I'm just offering this for a bit, but please, yeah.
Well, thank you. It reminds me of you know, during the Brexit process. I used to go to London quite often and take a taxi from the station to a place I used to work, sometimes to your place. And I often got into these uncomfortable conversations with some taxi drivers, because the minute I said I was coming from Brussels, I was ordered. It's like I had a label on my forehead, and people and the taxi drivers, I can think of at least 2 occasions where they started to pour their anger at me and identifying me with Brussels being the, you know, the EU regulator, and it got to a point where I was thinking, okay, maybe I don't mention that I'm from Brussels anymore. And I remember one occasion I said, actually, so I found myself arguing a little bit with them. Yeah? And there was one occasion where I just listened to the person, the taxi driver, share with me all the reasons why he voted for Brexit and how, you know, difficult the situation of his brother and his sister-in-law and in their village and this and that. And I just connected with the person, just listened basically to their pain. And there was a lot of pain. And all I could do is just sympathize with their pain. And yeah, sure, it must be difficult to be living what you're living. And it shifted completely the space. So it shifted. I was not trying to convert the person. I was not trying to argue. I was simply connecting to their pain, to their reality, and feeling sorry for what they were going through. I could genuinely empathize with that. And it shifted the space. He went from angry to being curious himself. So it's an example of what you were saying. It's like there's no guarantee that anything is going to happen. There's no guarantee of anything. But that's where we have agency.
And that's where that alchemy happens, right? When the field softens, when potentially something new can emerge.
Yes, yes. And that's a hugely important point to me. And I feel strongly about this. In my experience, when I are able, because I'm not always able, of course, but when I'm able to just let go of my opinions and my need to be right or to change or to convert the person, what I've noticed is what shifts is a heart-to-heart connection. What shift is the feeling unconscious of feeling seen, of feeling that actually us with our whatever we're feeling inside is okay. The other with me can hold that.
Yeah.
And it's almost like there's another force at play in that moment. It's almost like life's intelligence gets in there through our hearts and holds us into this space of vulnerability, of feeling connected to one another. And for me, that's whenever I had the opportunity to experience that, I really felt that there's something else than two people or a group of people in the room. There's really another force. Maybe Mindel calls it the Tao, the life force, the life intelligence that is there to hold us, to co-create with us, to soothe things, to help us connect one another. But it requires that we open our hearts at least ever slightly, without judgment.
Yeah. And I can see a lot of agreement and in the chat, and obviously we are inviting the diversity of opinions here. And there was a mention before of that, quantum physics and the idea of and how witnessing is connected to that. And there is something true that when we witness the experience of another, things shift.
Yes.
Right. The observer is really hugely important, but we get them changed, and we allow the force to work through us. In some ways, going back again to the title of this talk, that Alchemy of Right Relationship. And somebody actually quoted Rumi, and Anne-Marie and I were thinking of whether to bring Rumi's poem of, beyond the field of right or wrong, there's a field, I'll meet you there. And it's here, it's in our presence, because it's exactly that, when we are stuck and entrenched into our positions, we're speaking from the opposite banks of the river of life, and not and feeling stuck without the energy. We really need to either sit in the fire or get in the water and swim in order to end up in a different place, because otherwise we're just calcifying or perpetuating the lifeless, in a way, in relationships.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it could be a great time to share your experience of the group work you have been doing recently. How is that?
And
maybe 5 minutes left or 10, Jim? What do you think, Sunchit?
And I'm wondering if
Another
we
5
engage
minutes.
another 5 minutes.
5 minutes, thank you.
Well, all I'm going to say to that, again, to just respect the confidentiality of the experience, but I've been engaging in sort of creating spaces with other people. And this one in particular was about racism, where we meet, or anti-racism, where we meet every week and explore the topic and our experience of it. And the key, what I think is relevant to share here without going into any detail, is there's something in that commitment of showing up in a diverse group of people, or not so diverse group of people, where we're going to examine and bring that awareness and consciousness through our own experience in relationship with. And it might be relationship with one of the time spirits and ism, or it might be in, relationship in our smaller communities. But the key thing is that dedicated time, commitment of showing up and surrendering yourself to the relationship, because again, shifts sometimes, they always happen incrementally, but sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes, it happens in a moment. But I guess it's that part about committedly showing up with no agenda other than building that awareness and witnessing and meeting other people and showing up yourself fully.
Yeah, beautiful. So I'd like to finish with one quote from Arnold Mindell. We've been bringing Arnold Mindell in this space a lot because his body of work is phenomenal, and is really a great inspiration to do this work and to sit in the fire, as he calls it, and to help us do this work. He says, to those who want sustainable organizations and communities, my advice is begin by being humble, go back to school, learn awareness, learn about rank. You will save yourself and your community a lot of pain. So I think he wrote this in the 90s, and it's still very needed and very valuable. And my wish, sometimes I like to contemplate the thought that this community, this humanity rising community, if we all experiment with sitting in the fire with someone else, at least one person of another group, that by the non-locality effect, we can create ripples out in society, and we can together shift this emotional space and widen the walls, the grip of these isms that they have on us. That's my wish. So the question is, with whom are you going to sit in the fire? Sunchitza, who is next for me and to the community? Who are you going to sit in the fire with? That's the question.
Yeah.
And maybe we can bring Jim at this point.
Beautiful.
Well, you're certainly asking the right question, Anne-Marie. With whom do we sit in the fire? Because it feels like the world is on fire at the moment in all kinds of ways. I love, Suchina, your notion of time spirits, of the isms, racism, fascism, being time spirits that haunt us. I think that's a beautiful image, and it brings it alive in a particularly poignant way. So I want to thank you for it. I also want, in closing, everyone, just to note that these two masters of relationship are coming together to provide a course, a webinar, a 4-week webinar in May that we're calling the 4 aspects of relationship, so that we can all go more deeply into this very important matrix that defines our very humanness at a time when the pandemic is forcing us to shred many of the time-honored ways with which and through which we've actually shaped our relationships. So I wonder, Anne-Marie and Sunchika, whether you could just say a few words about your course, just to give people a heads up about what's coming.
Great, thank you, Jim. Sunchika, shall I start? And
of course.
So it's going to take place in May, the 4 Thursdays in May, and it's going to be about digging deeper into relationship with self, and then going to relationship with another person, and including the relationship in self and looking at how it plays out with another person. And then we go into relationship with the collective, with the group, and then relationship with the larger system, the earth, the cosmos, the larger system, and see our places of agency, to be creators of our relationships, to be active creators, to be also dreamers in our relationships, to look at relationships as doorways through which we can dream ourselves and what we have best to offer to the world, and really to provide tools, approaches, and also self-reflection. That's what it's about. Anything to add, Sunchita, to that?
I think you said it in a nutshell. I'm just noticing in the comments how about relationship with the opponents, and I think that will be part of relationship with the other, although sometimes we have the biggest opponent in ourselves. So, I think that opponent part will be present in all 4 parts. And of course, we don't see these parts as linear. They're cyclical and they feed into each other, and we're going to go from one another and back. Yes.
Thank you both. And we're working on the syllabus as we speak, and we'll be uploading it shortly, and we'll send out links to everyone. But as you can see from just this session in the past hour, Anne-Marie and Sunchika have done a masterful job in opening up, I think, how nuanced right relationships are. And I would call into the conversation as we close a comment that Rajendra made right at the beginning of the session, saying there are right relationships and there are left relationships. And I think in our world, we're being challenged to develop both relationships with people with whom we can establish right relationships, and relationships with people with whom we cannot establish right relationships, that are fraught with opposition and fraught with tensions and conflict, and how we navigate through this thicket at a time, let us remind ourselves, when social media is actively encouraging, enabling parallel universes of facts and false news and conjecture being passionately embraced by the people in that particular parallel universe, having nothing to do with the reality on the ground or the realities in other universes. We're in a world in which silos and kind of left relationships are proliferating all over the world. And what these 2 women have brought to our attention through this notion of time spirits, I think, which is a brilliant conceptualization, that right relationships are a matter that requires deep heartfulness, as you've heard, and the ability to almost shape shift into the matrix of relationship itself, where you change as much as the other person who you want to change. Which means that right relationship is a high, very high art form. So I want to thank you both for your contribution here, and I can hardly wait to be able to attend your course in May, and we'll keep everybody posted on that. And then tomorrow, everyone, we will be returning to the indigenous mind. Those group of people still existing on planet Earth in the midst of all our modernity, industrialization, crass materialism, consumerism, which we call civilization. There are still those peoples that have maintained through the ages the time spirit of right relationship to the earth. So we thought, in the aftermath of the trial with Donald Trump in the United States, as the divisiveness now stalks this land, the pandemic, we would bring in Phil Lane, a elder in the Native American tradition in North America, to just talk with us about his views on our world from the indigenous mind. We'll also be having an opening with Shelley Alcorn, who many of you know has been gracing us from time to time with her comments on developments around the election and the trial of Donald Trump. So we'll be weaving, again, contemporary events and the perspective of ageless women, ageless wisdom coming from the indigenous mind. That was a little bit of a Freudian slip, because we've heard the ageless wisdom of two women today. And I want to express my deep gratitude and thankfulness, and then invite all of you finally to the after session chat group where we can just go deeper into many of these matters. But Anne-Marie and Suchika, thank you very, very much for a very heartful and profound meditation on right relationship, the alchemy of right relationships in a very divided world. Thank you both. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you here again tomorrow, same time, same station on Zoom at 5:00 p.m. Central European Time. Bye-bye.
And thank you for the comments on the chat. I love those comments. I love the activity. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you,
Yeah,
Jim.
we have the most wonderful chat group.
I know, they're amazing. So alive, so lively, so insightful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.